Really excited about this session. We've called it kind of future-proof. It covers a wide variety of topics, but kind of all ones that we think relate to the future of search. So that's why we call it future-proof. That's a really good introduction to a talk there. So without further ado, if we can make a big round of applause and welcome to the stage our first speaker, that's Nichola. Now, when I get drunk, I get louder and I lose my voice. When Nichola gets drunk, she gets more northern. It's magic. Anyway, a big round of applause for Nichola, everybody.
Apologies in advance, I'm not actually drunk, but I will use my fine northern accent. So algorithms are constantly evolving because we as human beings and the way that we use technology is constantly evolving. And that's something that we hear anecdotally all the time. But I happened to see in real life an example of this a couple of months ago. And it kind of underpinned my research and gave me a bit of a focus for this talk. So it's a little story that I will share with you. So I was on my way home from a meeting in London, walking down the South Bank. And if you're unfamiliar with the South Bank, it's a really lovely walk. Heading towards Waterloo, you've got that really famous view of the Thames, with the House of Parliament and all the rest of it. Fairy lights in the trees, you've got skaters, street entertainers, pop-up taco trucks, whatever, you name it, London going on. And I'm walking along, enjoying my kind of evening, and I felt a sudden change in the atmosphere. You know, the way that you can tell before a fight happens in a pub, or something awful is about to happen, or something good. If enough human beings are in the same space and they're feeling quite strongly about something at the same time, there's like an electricity. So I kind of got a bit of a shock and looked around properly for the first time to see what was going on. And I noticed there were a lot of young people crying to their best friends or their parents. They were probably about 14 to 16. I say that because they were in school uniform, but it was about 7, 8 at night. So that must have been the kind of average age. So I was thinking, why are all these young people crying? What's going on? And I realized I was level with the ITV studios. And as I'm looking to my left there, I can spot Cheryl through the railings, but it was clear she wasn't the main event because there's just a couple of people clinging to the railings staring at her. So I imagine there'd been some sort of boy band on X Factor filming that night, and this is why these young people were so emotional. But that's not the point. So remember that these people are crying to their best friends. Here's the thing. Every single one of them were on their own. Every single one of these teenagers were like this with their phone, imploring the person that they were talking to and sharing that emotional experience. And as far as they were concerned, they were right there with them. It was a really real emotional moment. And we've all heard the kind of stats and this anecdotal evidence about Generation Z, and how this generation is born with touchscreen technology. They walk around with a computer in their pockets all the time. So for them, it feels really different. They're instantly connected to whatever it is that they want. And it was quite striking to really see that in reality. So I dug into the stats a little bit more on this. So just to kind of give us a little bit of a difference between Millennial and Generation Z. There will be some Generation Z people in this room, I'm sure. Most of us may be Millennials. Some of us might be scraping along at the end of the Millennial generation, like myself. But there are some really key differences between these two generations. So Millennials are people who were kind of coming to adult maturity at the turn of the millennium, so 1975-ish onwards. We might routinely use 3 screens and think that we're pretty cool with that. Whereas Gen Z, 96 onwards, will routinely switch between 5 different devices. We millennials may use social networks, and whereas Generation Z youngsters will do that too, they're a little more fond of private messaging apps, Snapchat, etc. Some of us may be more used to mouse, whereas Gen Z is used to using touch screen. And I think this other stat, this is something you've all heard because it's quite a headline attention-grabbing one about this 8-second attention span, which apparently is a second less than a goldfish. And that's There you go. That's kind of scary, I think, as people who are producing content or trying to sell products online. If we've only got 8 seconds, is that really true? So we dug into this a little bit ourselves at my company. Here's a graph from Business Intelligence just showing that shift. This is quite striking as well. So towards the end of last year, messaging apps actually overtook social networks in terms of usage. So what we did is we looked at all of our clients. We've got quite a wide client base, and we took clients across a range of different sectors. We chose sectors that could, logically be considered to have appeal to all sorts of generations. So rather than choosing, say, mortgages and finance, which, is going to be more apt for millennials onwards, we looked at sectors like lifestyle and travel, which arguably is as interesting to one generation to another. And what we found that in every single case across each of these 3 sectors that we looked at, travel, lifestyle, and F&B, the younger generation, the 18 to 24 demographic, which is just at the edge of the Generation Z, is the youngest demographic you can get information about in Google Analytics. In every single case, they were far less likely to spend any time with your content. In fact, between 11 and 25% less time than any other demographic. And another stat that I've managed to find that was really quite interesting, and I think it kind of presents some challenges, but also opportunities for us as marketers, and particularly those of us that are looking at user experience, is that whereas previously we might have been more interested in a cool experience, a site that delivers something really funky to interact with, because potentially of this lack of attention, or this use of kind of having a mobile computer in your pocket all the time, Generation Z is interested in a cool product. They don't care about your site. They can give a shit about it. They just want to get straight to the object of their desires, whether it's a pair of shoes, whether it's a Tinder date, whatever. Just get me there, to the point of my search. So we might think that, okay, well, so what? It's just a few kids. But actually, 40% of all consumers will be this generation by 2020. And I know 2020 sounds like kind of, woo, future scary. There's 3 years' time. In 3 years' time, 40% of the people we're trying to sell product to or provide our content to will be this generation, which means we need to act now in order to get the best out of this or in order to speak to them properly. So for me, I think there's 3 core areas of focus. We need to be much faster. We need to be on all connected devices and providing a consistent experience and a fast experience on those connected devices. And we need to be taking people direct to object, so less experiential stuff and more of a conduit. By direct to object, I mean direct to object of desire rather than a physical object. It might not be a pair of shoes, it might be a piece of content, whatever my search intent is. So let's have a look at speed first. This is old news. I mean, Google have been talking about speed as a ranking factor since 2010. However, this deck is pretty cool. Reason being, it's not very often that if Google ever speak at a conference, they then share the deck afterwards. This is Paul Haar at SMX Munich a couple of weeks ago. This deck is still available now, and it might not be for much longer, so go and get your hands on it, because there's some really nice little tidbits in there about how ranking engineers at Google prioritize and evaluate things. And within there, we find that time to result is the 3rd most critical metric that they use in evaluation. And again, no huge surprise there, because we've been given tools and we've been communicated to by Google that speed is a very important factor. We know that. This is old news. So critical path analysis tools such as Page Speed Insights can help us make kind of, if you like, front-end improvements. But what is a little bit more interesting, and I think there'll be a little bit more movement on this in future, is the server modules that you can get. So if you're running an Apache or an Nginx server, you can install these modules server-side, which will automatically optimize things for you, optimize in terms of speed and performance, which is great if you're a content publisher, particularly if you've got multiple people contributing content, because it's obviously a constant training exercise about please compress your images and all the rest of it. So doing that takes some of that responsibility out of the individual author's hands. More interesting, though, are the things that we can do with HTML5 in terms of resource delivery. So this slide comes from a project, a Chromium kind of collaborative project by a guy called Ilya Grigorich, who is a performance engineer at Google. And what the guys did is they looked at where's the biggest kind of point of pain in the whole process. So it's not kind of DNS lookup, it's not the connection, bandwidth is never the issue. So if you see on this graph here, time to first byte, which is something that you might hear SEOs or performance engineers talk about all the time, what's the time to first byte? It's kind of irrelevant because that's not the problem. The problem is incomplete delivery of all the resources. So you see at the top there, the blue line there, that's the time it takes to actually get all of the content downloaded. And that's where the block in the chain occurs. So it's not a bandwidth issue, it's a resource latency issue. One of the most interesting ways to solve this, or to look at improving this, is using these different rel attributes with an HTML5, which smarter browsers like Chrome and Safari can understand and work with as suggestions. So again, another deck freely available from a Google engineer. Get it now while it still lasts. So Ilya Grigorich is the person that's doing the most kind of research in this at the moment. Using these rel attributes, and here's a kind of little bit more detail on that. So pre-connect, rel equals pre-connect, rel equals prefetch, preload, pre-render, allows us to use a link attribute to reference the resource I want and pre-connect to it, prefetch it, or most powerfully, pre-render it. Google actually uses themselves. So if you search for a brand, like BBC or what, a brand that's really ubiquitous, and look at the source code of the SERP, you'll see they use rel equals pre-render on the first result, because it's pretty much a dead cert. You're going to want to click on that. So it's pretty powerful stuff. And I first got interested in this subject after a conversation with a US-based SEO called Mike King, or @iPullRank on Twitter. And he has wonderfully written up a lovely case study on how we approach this. Because obviously it's more kind of sitting in the dev camp. So what Mike has done is look at all of the pitfalls, methods of implementation, considerations, but most importantly, measurements using Google Analytics API from an SEO standpoint. So I'd strongly recommend having a look at that, because as you can see, we've tested it and implemented it in one case, didn't quite get that implementation result, which is, we did get something like 30% improvement. But in Mike's case study, he managed to speed up his site almost 69%. So it's well worth looking at that. So that's one point on speed. Second point on all device, our all device strategy. Whilst there is a lot of talk, obviously, about Generation Z using 5 screens and routinely connecting to the internet, there's different uses and applications for different types of connected devices. So if I'm on my Xbox or whatever it is, I'm connecting to kind of troll my mates whilst we're all playing Call of Duty or whatever that might be. I have my own thoughts about how the whole, Internet of Things may really play out in future, and whether or not our fridge talking to our car is going to be that useful. We'll see. But I think from a more practical and tangible level now, it's a bit more interesting to talk about mobile phones and smartphone usage. So again, this generation is far more inclined to use their smartphone to do absolutely anything than any other kind of device. And iPhone is the most popular, Android a close second. But in terms of the activities that this generation is engaging in, social activity is the largest kind of contribution, with games coming second. For the e-commerce people amongst us, don't feel disheartened that shopping is the 5th most common activity for this generation, because although it's the 5th most common activity in terms of where they spend their time, they're still far more likely to spend their time shopping on a phone than, say, the 55+ generation. And they are the most inclined generation or demographic to do their online shopping on their phones. So I think that's quite powerful. But again, it's quite important to remember that we need to be super fast, and we need to be connecting them straight to the object with no disruption and no cool experience along the way, just a conduit straight to the object of desires. So when we talk about the mobile experience and how to speed that up, there's a couple of directions which I think are quite interesting at the moment. From a content publisher perspective, there is the AMP project, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, it's a AMP HTML, so a much more resource-light kind of version of HTML using asynchronous scripts. Strips the third-party JavaScript out of the critical path, and JavaScript is the thing that messes up the critical path. It also prioritizes resource loading and sizes your resources statically for an AMP kind of page, for the devices that will consume an AMP page, because it's mobile. So do look up the Accelerated Mobile Pages project. There is so much help on there, and there's even like a sample page. You don't need to be a dev, you can just do a kind of control paste, and with a little bit of kind of basic HTML, you can write your own pages. It's pretty simple. And you don't even, so here's an example actually. So if you look at, or do a search for something that you would find a news story on the BBC on your phone, you can see the AMP page. Or if you're on a desktop, if you do the same thing, get to a page of content on the BBC, do your view source or control U or whatever it is on a Mac, and then have a look in there for your rel equals AMP HTML, you can see the link referenced to the AMP HTML version of that page, and go and have a poke around in the code there. And kind of, not exactly vice versa, but the reference pointing back there on the AMP HTML page is canonical. So AMP HTML is pointing back and saying the real HTML is the canonical version. Okay. And you don't have to be the BBC to make use out of this. And you don't even need to know HTML, to be honest. If you're using WordPress and you're publishing content, there's a really good plugin. You can just bolt that in there. And also, Yoast SEO will work with this now if you download the glue for Yoast AMP, which will connect all your metadata, all of your SEO stuff to the AMP page. It's really easy. Moving on from that, so I think the second area in which we can make real big improvements with our mobile ease of access, let's say, is in mobile search. So whilst there are a number of, and mobile search isn't just searching on the web with a mobile phone, it's much broader than that. There's so many more other ways. So we've got Spotlight search that's limited in that it's very personal to us and our device and whatever the hell is installed on that. So apps, people. There's also Safari Suggest. Safari, being a smarter browser, can understand those rel attributes we were talking about, the pre-party, as Illegal Rich calls it. But more importantly, we do have the index, because that is the biggest source of data and source of traffic. So apps being indexed is old news, that's cool. So there's an example there. If I search for I think I searched for Audible in the first example, Audible books, and then I'm given, much as it would be a traditional search result, I'm given alternatives and the originator of my search, so the entity that is recognized, and then two comparable equivalents. So standard kind of, here's some apps that also match your query. Because my query, Audible books, is understood to be an app intent, Or secondly, we've got apps in the index, very similar sort of experience, but way, way more powerful than that is app indexing. So deep linking, deep indexing of the URLs on my app. Far, far greater opportunity. So it's worked on Android for quite some time, but now with iOS 9 to October, I think, whenever it was, you can actually get all of the deep linked pages within your app into the index, which is extremely powerful. I'll tell you how powerful it is and how much of a really good opportunity this is. It took me 4 hours to find an example. I've got a hell of a lot of apps on my phone, and I'm kind of decent at search. 4 hours to find an example to show you. Nobody is doing this yet in the UK. So in the example here, what I've done is I've searched for a restaurant review for a restaurant near where our office is. And because I have, or by the end of a 4-hour search, I had the Yelp app installed on my phone, the results that I see there, and this is the slide that I wished I had laser, but I don't. So the results that I see there take me straight to the page within the app, not the front page of the Yelp app, but straight to the review of whatever restaurant it was in the Yelp app by default. That's getting me much quicker to the object of my desire. As I say, that was a 4-hour search to find that. No one is doing this. How do we do this? So the easiest, simplest way to do this is to have one URL to rule them all across whatever device I'm targeting. Okay. If I keep the same URL structure and submit those URLs to the index via Search Console, which is lovely and easy if I'm Android, if iOS 9 then uses the SDK, I think it's Cocoa Pods, to be able to kind of submit that URL data through Search Console. There's loads, again, so much help. It's really, really easy. There's a testing tool for Android on there. There's also Search Analytics. You just need to register if you've got Android. As I say, you need the Cocoa Pods module to get that to speak to Search Console for iOS 9. But you can also check the implementation as well, regardless of device. So that's my bit on mobile. So finally, direct to object. How can we be faster in taking this emerging consumer demographic straight to what they want? Well, obviously, we can improve the speed of our site, and we can make sure that they work on mobile. But there are some other ways as well. And again, this is the biggest, it's not a threat. Every threat is an opportunity. But I think this is the biggest kind of fundamental shift in business model that we really need to embrace as publishers in order to get people to what they want. And that is, forget about your site. Forget about that website that you spent ages building. We really need to change our mindsets and think about the web as this kind of beautiful, romantic idea of a connected web. We don't really own anything. It's all out there. And this is why BuzzFeed have just killed it over the past 2 years, because they've always understood that. And they launched with this strategy. 75%, you can all read, of their content views, so the actual interaction with a BuzzFeed product, a page of content, piece of video, whatever it is not on the BuzzFeed website. The highest contributor is Facebook native video, 27%. The next highest, I'm going to ask actually, so 21%. Does anybody want to have a guess as to where 21% of BuzzFeed traffic comes from? It's an app. Snapchat. Pretty incredible, isn't it? Snapchat. So that tells you one thing. 16-year-olds. Well, I mean, you know, I'm being flippant, but you get the point. So what does that mean for us as content marketers, or as eventually people trying to sell product? Facebook understands this. Obviously, Facebook always waiting to take our content or whatever it is and put it into the little walled garden. But you know, there you go. Traffic is traffic. So we need to embrace these opportunities to publish elsewhere, such as Canvas, which is great. But as to where this is taking us, and I think possibly one of the most interesting spaces to watch in the next year, seriously, is the rise of the personal agent. I'm saying personal agent instead of personal assistant because I think when the assistant becomes an agent, that's where it gets exciting. So I'll explain the difference. So phase 1, Siri, is inactive. You've got to kind of press the button to wake the beast, and then we can interact with voice command. Alexa, which is the agent, if you like, of Amazon Echo, Alexa's always scanning, Alexa's always listening, it's constantly on, bit stalky, bit exciting, depending on your perspective. Alexa's waiting for a wake word, which is Alexa, funnily enough. When she, and I'm kind of giving her agenda because, well, they did, so I'm going to. When she hears the wake word, then there will be the response to whatever command comes next. That's stage 2 of a move towards agent. Stage 3 is the ability to act on our behalf like a user agent does, a proxy, like taking a vote for us, our proxy agent. So I think that becomes most exciting. Personally for me, when I'm driving, I get a lot of work done on the phone and stuff like that, hands-free, obviously. But could you imagine being able to sort of say, okay, Google now, I need you to find, I want to go to Thailand, I've got 300 quid, I don't want to pay more for my flight, go, come back to me when you found it. Off goes bot 1. Bot 2, I've got to book a meeting here and then, I need a hotel to stay in London, and I want to stay in the Hyatt Regency, so go, find me the best room that you can, executive, off you go. Could you imagine doing that? The ability to just automatically dictate my agency, my robot army, as to what they should be doing on my behalf. And I think that's where the future is going to go. And I think that these technologies and devices and smarter browsers and obviously better voice recognition will take us there in possibly 18 months to 2 years' time. So again, that's slightly more futuristic, but where we should be looking to next. If we want to reach and we want to speak properly to this kind of 40% of all consumers in 3 years' time, quite simply, we've got to be fast, be mobile, and be absolutely everywhere. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicola. I really enjoyed